share the normal stuff. So you can see the first slide. I think Ari is maybe rebooting his stuff because he's having audio trouble tonight. Anyway, okay. So you want to kick off? Great. Well, good evening, everybody. On January the 19th next month, in January, I'll reach 60 years. So I'm going to talk about the ham radio I did and the professional technology career that I've followed over that time. And I guess I hope there'll be some interesting points along the way where they intersected. I've always kind of tried to ensure that my hobby didn't become work or vice versa, because I always thought it was healthy to have something different to do apart from work. But it was the professional dawn of software-defined radio that I think came closest to that, but we'll come to that later. But I've been pretty fortunate, really, to have enjoyed pretty much all of my working life so far. And I plan to retire probably sometime early next year and enjoy the rest of my life. I don't need to work, really, so I've got more time to play radio and lots of other things. But I've met really very many interesting people through that professional working life, but also through ham radio. And I think that's probably the biggest thing they had in common, was the great people that you get to meet. So I suppose we better start just briefly about, I've got some pictures that I'll show you and talk through. There's a bit about technology, obviously, in here a bit later on. There's some techie stuff, and there's some general interest stuff about where I am and what I do and stuff. And where we've got to with radio. So I guess I better start just to position it a little bit for you about where it all started back in January 1966. It was a little time just before we won the World Cup, and we haven't won the World Soccer Cup since. So it was a good year. And for me, it was a particularly good year because I emerged. And this is my parents' house. So for those who might not be so familiar with UK geography, I thought we'd sort of explain. Can you see my cursor moving at all?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So we're in this area of East Anglia that we call it, this bit that sticks out. So it's northeast of London. It's east southeast of Cambridge, and at the moment I'm about 15-20 miles inland from the North Sea coast. The little blue dot that you see there is where I live at the moment, and the red arrow is pointing to the bit right on the coast where this house is, where my parents still live, actually. They're 90 and 91 now. And that's in the town of Dovercourt. Now, that's not to be confused with the seaport of Dover, which is down here. But it's near the seaport of Harwich. And it's quite a busy port that certainly used to be busier. But it has ships and ferries that go across to mainland Europe. So it's a small peninsula that sticks out, and I was born to my two parents, Derek and Julie. I had a fairly modest upbringing, really. My father was initially in the Air Force, and then he worked at the port when he got posted to Harwich to deal with logistics, I think, in the Air Force. And then after he left there, he worked on importing goods from continental Europe. And that was in a time before tariffs were used as weapons and when the charges involved had to be manually processed using no more than a calculator and some specialized knowledge. So that kept him busy for a number of years before he got to retire early and enjoy the rest of his life. As I say, he's now 91. My mother worked in retail banking on the high street, and that was in an age where you could walk into town and get cash from the bank. It's pretty hard to do these days, as everything's online and automated. But so my parents still live in that house where I grew up. It's a modest semi-detached without too much garden. There's a bit around the edge there that you can see on the left-hand side. And my first shack would be there in due course. And my parents never drove or even had a car, so we used to travel everywhere by train. My father actually had as part of his job at the port, he had free travel on trains and ferries and boats. So we never needed to go anywhere by car. And we traveled a lot by train. So I suppose rather than being high tech, my initial ambition when I was sort of 3 or 4 years of age was to be a train driver, because I went on trains quite a lot. But I thought I'd give you a little poster next as to some of the geography I'm going to be talking about. So we've zoomed in on that peninsula now. You can see, hopefully you can see, around here there's Dovercourt and Harwich. That's my parental home, number one. And Harwich Radio Club. The Harwich Club is one I'll talk about a bit later. My first house was number 3 here at the end of the river. And that was the first house I bought. We'll talk about that. Over here was the place that I worked for 21 years at BT's Research Laboratories. So we'll talk. I'll feature a little bit in the talk. 5 over here is the place right on the Peninsula coast at Walton, where I've done a lot of VHF contesting. And we'll talk about that in due course. My current house is at number 6 here, just southwest of Ipswich. So that's where I'm located at the moment. You see there are lots of rivers along here that you can be at the end of either one of them. And number 7, right at the top here, is where we have our Ipswich Club contest site at a place called Otley. And I still go out there quite a lot, but that figures in the story. Another club that I'm involved with is the Colchester Club. So that's bang in the middle of Colchester town. And I get to go there and give talks, amongst other things. And then we've got an observatory site, which I'll mention later on, just sort of northwest of Colchester, at number 9 over here and out in the middle of the countryside. And the good thing about an observatory site is that if people are looking at the sky and planets, they need quite a quiet look for their telescope. And it's an extremely quiet radio site as well. So we'll come to where that's important. So I do this by epoch a little bit. So the first years, there's a picture of me that I dug out with my grandfather on the sofa at home. I think I was about 3 then. And neither of my parents were technical, as you've gathered by now. But my maternal grandfather, he was an old naval sailor. And when I was about 3 years old, as well as showing me the knitting that he's doing there, he showed me how to connect batteries, wires, and torch bulbs, and make them light up in different configurations. And so by the age of 6, I'd sort of graduated away from that and built my first crystal set receiver. And I sort of continued to learn, self-learn, and from books and magazines into my teens. But I first heard my first ham radio QSO on a present I got for Christmas, which was this Binatone World Star transistor receiver. I got that for Christmas in 1978. And the only 2 ham bands that I now realize that it covered was 2 meters and 80 meters. But it had no SSB. So I had to build a beat frequency oscillator from a project in one of these magazines that I used to take called Everyday Electronics. I don't know if you had that over there, but it's a bit like Practical Wireless and these other things. But it had all sorts of projects in it. And one of them was a beat frequency oscillator that allowed magic almost to happen. So I could suddenly resolve all the phone signals on 80 meters on SSB. And I thought that was quite magic, that you could build this little box and just not even connect it, just put it next to it, next to this radio. And suddenly these voices, instead of being scrambled, were totally understandable. So with that sort of magic in mind, I thought, well, I'd better find out more about this. So in 1979, I joined the RSGB and I began reading Radcom. Now, in the 6-week, we used to have a 6-week summer school holiday. So still in 1979, when I was off school in the summer, it wasn't a particularly good summer. We'd had a really hot summer in 76. But in 79, it wasn't so good. And I read a book from the local library called The Amateur Radio Operating Manual. And this is the cover by R.J. Eckersley. In fact, I've still got a copy, but not that one. It's a much later edition that I've got on the shelf over there. Very interesting book. And I found out about what this amateur radio stuff was really about. And there was also a pamphlet from the what was the Radio Communications Agency, which was the what Ofcom used to be. And I've still got this this document here. I dug it out from the shelf earlier on, from all those years ago. And it's called How to Become a Radio Amateur. It was published by the government over here, and it sort of explained how you could do your radio amateurs exam and what the format was, and where you could find the syllabus and stuff, and where you could take it. And you could only really take it twice a year in those days. You could take it in London, I think probably Manchester as well, but London was sort of close enough to me, so. I pestered my father to take me up on the train to London, and we booked this this exam. It was only, as I say, held twice a year. It was December of '79 when I took this, and that was a time when CB was, which I'd never had anything to do with, was legalised here for the first time in the UK. And so many from that hobby were also taking their radio amateurs exams and becoming hams at the same time. So, but because of the overhaul in the licensing system, which was a paper system still, of course, in those days, it took 6 months for my first license to be issued, and I was G0DVJ, Golf 6 Juliet Bravo India, and that was a Class B license. I think Neil's talked about the UK classes of license as they were before. Which was VHF and up only, so I could use 2 meters and up. So that was my early foray into radio. But when I was 14, which was around that time, we had an inventor over here called Sir Clive Sinclair, who brought out his first kit personal computer in the UK, called the Sinclair ZX80. And I had the chance to borrow one of these for a couple of weekends from a friend of my father's who he worked with, who was also a sort of techie guy and had to have the latest bits and pieces. So he had one of these things, and it had 1K of memory, 1 kilobyte of memory, a Zilog Z80 processor, and you could program it using machine code or assembly language. And there was a basic interpreter in there as well. And so I played with this and became hooked. And so my computing journey sort of began. And the following year, they brought out the successor, which was the ZX81. It was 1981. I got one of these. I was lucky enough to get one of these. Had certain improvements over the original.
I
but
had
still
one
a very
of those.
yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Very basic, but very good for learning. So that was where my computer science exploration began. And if you compare that with what I do nowadays, a bit later on in the talk, it'll be amazing that how far we've come. So my first steps in both of these, radio and computing, were sort of learning by doing. So in the early 80s, my first radio that I saved up for, with my pocket money and Christmases and birthdays and things, was a Trio Kenwood TR9000, 10-watt multi-mode. My first antenna was a 5/8 whip for 2 meters, which I put on a biscuit tin lid, not the very one I showed there, but a similar sort of thing, in my bedroom. And eventually, of course, I pleaded with my parents to have a TV antenna installer come and erect a 5-element J-beam Miyagi for 2 meters, on the with a I think it was a Hirschman rotator, a TV sort of type rotator outside. And I learned a lot from that time on VHF. I learned how to do 2-meter tropospheric DXing, and I listened a lot to a local ham called Stuart, Golf 8 Papa Sierra. I think he's long since gone now, but I listened a lot to him working across to continental Europe on 2 meters, because we were very near the coast, and it was quite an interesting start in amateur radio compared to probably what a lot of people had. I also heard the local Ipswich repeater on 2 meters, and used that. And this repeater at the time was located at the site of the research establishment which I would eventually work at. So That's this is the first intersection, if you like, of my hobby and my professional career. I was also lucky that around this time, it was the era of the coming of the home computer, the home micro. And as well as the Sinclair stuff, eventually the BBC got involved and thought, well, computer literacy is going to be important. So we'll sponsor a program to educate the UK public about microcomputers. And we'll sponsor a machine that is fully featured and can teach them about it. So this was a 6502 processor-based machine, and I had to have one. So I begged and probably was a right pain of a teenager until I could get one. And I did so much with it. You know, I learned not just programming, but how it worked architecturally. I took it apart. I disassembled the operating system code. It was so expandable for a machine, an early machine at that time. I think probably in other parts of the world, you were using Commodore PETs and Research Machine 380s and things like that. But this was so good. It had so much potential for experimentation. You might just be able to see that it had sound for one thing. I mean, microcomputers didn't have to have sound. There's a grill there where the speaker was. You could make all sorts of multi-note sounds. So it wasn't just that you could have a single beep or something. You could play music because you could have chords together if you could program it. And there's a little slot there with on the side of the keyboard to the left there, which a rectangular slot. And that was where you could put cartridges in for a speech synthesizer, which again in those days was amazing. I mean, speech synthesis was really, really sort of cutting edge in those days. It had a full keyboard. It had on the back there were loads of ports. There was an analog port that you could put a joystick on, but of course I used that to connect a straight Morse key. And I wrote a program that would read my hand sent Morse, and that's how I taught myself to send CW. Because I could see the waveform on the screen. And people used to say my hand-sent CW with a straight key was very robotic because I'd learned by watching the waveform and being almost precise about exactly how long each dot and dash were. So that was something I did earlier on. You could put extra processors chips on it. You could put extra memory in it. You could put extra programming languages into it. You could put read-only memory chips in there to do all sorts of things. And I had an expansion board in mind so that I could put about 8 of these chips in and do lots of different things with it. So it's a phenomenal machine to learn about computing. And the other thing I did at that time, because I was G6JBI, I discovered my mate down the road, Rob, G6HQV, is now G4WHK, and you don't hear him on very often, unfortunately. But he and I, we both had these machines, and we actually did some pioneering new data work at the time. I mean, we all talk about FT8 nowadays, but in those days, although there was RTTY and stuff, there was no sort of pure data control of radios and things. And what we did was developed a protocol where we could use the computer to control each other's radio at the other end. And thinking back in the day, that was quite pioneering now for the hobby. Nobody else was doing that at the time. I also used that to help with the Cambridge packet. So when packet radio first came about, there was a form of it called Cambridge packet at the time, which was primarily launched and developed by some people in Cambridge, some clever bods. But I was also involved with that initiative as well, even though I was still a teenager. So I'm about 16 at this time, so I've learned how computers work and what's inside them and what the chips do, as well as how to program them. I've started on amateur radio on 2 meters mainly, but multi-mode. I think the key thing about that first radio was that it was a multi-mode radio, not an FM only box for 2 meters, and that really gave me the options to explore DX and other things, beacons and all sorts of stuff, and CW. But I was a school kid, so at 16 I sat my O levels, as we called them. These were the main exams that one took when you were about to leave school, and the maximum anyone took was 8 subjects. And mine were English. I remember them: English, maths, computing, of course, was a new subject in those days. Latin, physics, chemistry, French, and geography. And very few people, really did well in all 8 subjects. I mean, I did best in English, math, computing, and Latin and physics. My chemistry, French, and geography wasn't quite so good. But nevertheless, I got 8 O levels. But I also saw a syllabus laying on the physics teacher's desk one day, and it was for an O level in electronics. And of course, the school didn't teach electronics, but I saw this syllabus and flicked through it, and I thought I could do that. So I asked my physics teacher, "Can I do an extra O level?" And he wasn't convinced at first, and so he sort of showed me some papers, and I answered them sort of in front of him, and he said, "Yeah, I think you ought to sit this." And in fact, it turned out to be my highest grade of all my O levels for something that I was never taught at school. And so I was really quite proud of that. I was the only kid in the school who did the electronics O level, and it turned out to be the highest grade of any O level that people did at that time. I went on to do maths, physics, and computing at advanced level, which was the next 2 years. So that would take you to 18 before you. They've changed it all now, but in those days, that would take you to the point where you could go to university and stuff. So I had a pretty good grounding, really, in both VHF radio and computing. And I walked through the computer science, computer studies stuff at school, really, because I'd done it all at home and a lot more. But my A levels grades were actually not that brilliant in maths, physics, and computing. Computing was fine, but the maths and physics was a little bit low, and that's because I was having fun. I was doing lots of other stuff as a teenager, like you do, and so I didn't really get my head down as much as I should, which of course makes a difference when you go around universities to get entrance qualifications and things. So I ended up. I got a very good offer from what was called Hatfield Polytechnic, is now the University of Hertfordshire, to do computer science, and it was an industrial sandwich course. I don't know if you guys had this sort of thing, but it means that you do 2 years of academic study, and in the middle of it you do or 3 years of academic study, and somewhere in the middle there, either after the first year or the second year, you do a year in industry. So you don't do studying at that point; you learn on the job by going and working for a company, usually obviously something to do with the course that you're on. And actually, this Polytechnic was a great place for computing. It was in the middle of the country, just north of London, and it had British Aerospace research place very close by. And of course, computing was still a new subject in these days. They were still working out what the syllabus should be. I mean, they knew there was a programming element to it and an architectural element to it, but they didn't really understand what else there was to teach. Mine had a bit of maths in it. It had a bit of communication skills in it. It had all sorts of stuff. And actually, it was very good because we had use of all these British Aerospace industrial computing machines, as well as the ones at the university. So you can see we had DEX System 2020 at the university. And my placement, well, actually, in the first year, I learnt to play guitar. I met Chris, G0AMG, Golf Zero Alpha Mike Golf, near the college there. He showed me CW a bit more and showed me his bencher paddle. And that's what got me onto using a bencher paddle for CW eventually. And I had a great time, really, because I didn't have to do much work in the first year at university because, again, I'd done most of that for myself. It was a foundation year, and I knew most of it already. So I had a fairly light year. And then I had time to sort of look for a placement in industry, but it was always very competitive. Where could you go to work for your year out, as it were, your secondment as part of your degree? And it could make a huge difference to what you could do with your degree course, because good placement meant that you learnt a lot and had some experience for a job later. So my second year placement was actually at British Telecom's research labs. That's the site that you see below there with the 2 towers. There's the radio tower in the middle there, and the water tower, as they call it, on the side there. And this is the main building, but it's a huge site out in the middle of nowhere, just to the east of Ipswich, as I showed you on the map earlier. And fantastic place. I mean, they were doing cutting edge stuff right from day one on virtually every topic there was. Certainly on optical fiber cables, they had the first multi-mode fibers in the world developed there, and they were doing lots of other stuff. And I always wondered why there were curtains around the fourth floor there, around all the windows, but only on the fourth floor. And I later found out that that's where all the security and secret stuff was done for the government. And we'll come on to that perhaps a little bit later. So during that, yeah, I could travel. That was close enough to home that I could travel each day from home. And I started off doing that on the train as usual. But during that year back from uni, which was 85, 86, I passed my driving test and I passed my Morse test. I bought my first car because I had an auntie that died of cancer, unfortunately, and she left all of the nephews and nieces a certain amount to use when they became 18. So I used mine to buy a first Toyota Corolla car, second-hand, brown one, and I did miles in it. But anyway. It was very unusual to have a car at university, so I was quite popular when I went back after my year out, and I had a car at the college. So yeah, so I got a lot done because most of my friends were still at college during that year, right? So I went back to Dovercourt to the parental home and worked at BT, and I didn't have a lot of social life apart from anybody on the radio that I talked to, because most of my school friends were still away at uni. So it was a great time to get, right, as I say, driving tests passed and my Morse test passed and all sorts of things. So at that point is when I gained my Class A, now the full license, and the G0DVJ call sign. So I had it all the way from 85. And I upgraded my radio. So I got to the first shack in a box type radio because I knew no different, and it was convenient for me to save up for one box as opposed to half a dozen different boxes that I needed. So this was the Yaesu, because it's a Yaesu group, so I mention all the Yaesu radios. Yaesu FT767GX. So it was an HF box, but you can see from the back view there, hopefully, there are three identical or look identical modules with antenna sockets on. And those were built-in transverter units that you could optionally buy. And they were for 6, 2, and 70 centimeters. So suddenly I had a huge new radio that I could play on HF with, because I passed my Morse test, so I could use all bands and everything now. And I could use this shiny new call sign on HF, but I still maintained these transverter modes on 270 and 6. And 6 was a relatively new band in those days. There weren't many people doing 6. So that was great. Meanwhile, at BT, I had access to some more DEC equipment, actually, DEC microvaxers and VMS operating system, for anybody who knows about these things, remembers these things. And we were doing some quite cutting edge stuff. So I was set to work on routing algorithms. So this was a graphical display where you could draw a flowchart of the program you wanted to write, and then you clicked a button and it would generate the code. And again, we do that all the time these days. But in this time, this was really unusual. This was cutting edge stuff. And my routing algorithm was the one that redrew all of the flowchart boxes. Every time you moved a box or put an extra one in, you had to join them back up with lines. And the computer had to work out where to draw the lines to optimize it and make it neat and tidy. So my routing algorithm was the first piece of software I wrote commercially in this thing, and I still remember it. So BT must have seen something in me at that time. I think I got the placement because at the interview they said, well, tell us about your hobbies. And so I started telling them about amateur radio, and then I told them that actually there was a repeater aerial on top of this radio tower, which I could use with my radio set up at home, and they must have liked me to some extent, because they agreed to sponsor me for the rest of my time at university, and I had the option of an interview for a job there afterwards when I finished my degree. So they saw something in me anyway. And indeed, after my degree, I got a first in computer science. I did a project which was based on some of the work I'd done at BT. So my final year project and dissertation was was pretty good because it was industrial based. It was, had a real reason for doing it as opposed to just being a sort of academic project as such. And it went down pretty well. And so I think there were 85 people on our new computer science degree course in those days. And of those 85 people, 6 of us got a first. And it was pretty interesting stuff. So I graduated, and in August 1988, I joined BT Research. They interviewed me again and said, well, we still like what you're doing. Do you want to come and work for us? And I thought, yeah, I'll go there for a couple of years, get some experience, and then move on. I ended up doing 21 years there, and a lot of different stuff. And some of that is what you're going to hear about. I started off doing software research and a lot of European collaborative work, which was really good experience. So my boss, at the end of the first, so I joined in August, and just before we finished for Christmas in 1988, he asked me, "Have you got a passport?" And I sort of looked at him a bit strange and said, "Yes, why?" And he said, "Bring it back with you when you come back in January." And they enrolled me as their representative on one of these European collaborative research projects. And I spent a whole year doing 35 flights in 52 weeks, all around Europe, meeting all the people from European telecommunications and scientific companies, learning a hell of a lot, both about culture and language, as well as the technical stuff. So that was fantastic. I also did some work on mathematical specification of software. Again, that was quite new in those days. So how to prove that a piece of software will do what you want it to do and has no bugs in it. It's never really taken off, but there are still some of those mathematical methods around. The problem is in actually specifying mathematically what you want the result to be. You can certainly do the proof once you've done that. I worked on all through the 80s. I worked on 90s. I worked through new billing systems for telecoms, because in those days we used to have strange ways of giving people a telephone bill. It wasn't based on how long that they spoke or anything like that. It was on some funny unit thing that was charged depending on the start and end point of the call and all sorts of strange things. And they wanted to simplify that for the 1990s. And then, of course, in the early 90s, we had the explosion of the World Wide Web. And I worked with the global sales team in London to help them work out what to do with that. And I also worked at a software centre in Glasgow in Scotland for a while. And also at this site, there was a radio club and called Martlesham Radio Society, because the little village that this place was nearby was Martlesham. So MRS, and that was another club I joined. So I'd already joined Ipswich Club by this stage. In 1990, I helped form the Harwich Club, which was a new inaugural thing. And so I was already in Ipswich and Harwich Club. I started visiting the Colchester Club because I had a car, so I could get there. And I also joined this employee radio club, Martlesham Radio Society. So I was a member of those 4 clubs back in 88. And I'm still a member of all those 4 clubs today. I also met Andy, Golf 4 Papa India, Quebec, who's one of the best contesters in the country here still. And I learned a huge amount about serious contesting from him and how to use CT as a logger for contesting and stuff like that. I've put Morse code up here because I did quite a bit of stuff. So I volunteered to be a county Morse examiner. Apparently my Morse was good enough and they accepted me. And so I was doing other ham tests for CW from 1988 until they abolished the Morse test a couple of decades later. I also did Russian classes because I thought I'd better get out a bit. Now I've graduated and I've got a job. Perhaps I could get a girl, so the only way to get a girl is to get out in the world and meet people. And so I thought, well, Russian is used a lot on the radio. If I learned Russian language, that would be, I'm sure there'll be some nice women at the language class. So I'll do an evening class in Russian. So that's what I did. And I explored CW in different languages as well and started training other people in CW. So it was really a time when I honed in on CW. And I knew the Cyrillic alphabet in CW, and I could have a QSO, sort of rubber stamp QSO in I guess probably 14 or 15 different languages on CW at that time. I don't think I could today, but I still remember some of it. Anyway, so that was where I started first doing some training of others, which was CW training in those days. And so I'd helped form this new club in Harwich, where my parents still lived. I started doing my first field day contests, and that was instructive, both with Ipswich and Harwich. And that was in the days of paper logging, of course, and check logging. Now, I did develop my computing a bit more, and this was my at university. They actually had a laboratory full of Apple Macintosh computers, and so my first personal computer was also an Apple Macintosh. In fact, I was able to buy it as a student, and so I got a really good discount as a student buying my first Apple. And when I a couple of years after I started working at BT, I thought it was time to trade it in, and I sold it for more than I bought it for, which for a computer is almost unheard of. It's like a car; it drops in value as soon as you buy it because new ones are better. But this was I got it so cheap that as a student I was able to make a slight profit on when I sold it. And of course, I had access to lots of compute stuff at BT nowadays, so I didn't really need my own system. As we got into the early 90s, I bought my first house. So my first house was in Brantham at the end of the river there that I showed you on the first on the earlier slide. So getting into my late 30s, which is the mid-late 90s now, I'm still working at BT. And in 1993, I was doing a special event station, which I'd done several of, and this was with Scouts. So it was around Jota time. Jamboree on the air, and we were trying to educate some Scouts about amateur radio. And a lady came around with a friend of mine who I knew from the radio, who said, "Well, what are you doing these days apart from Scout stuff?" And I said, "Well, I'm learning Russian." She said, "Well, we've got a Russian lady staying with us. Why don't you come over for dinner one time and practice?" And I thought that was a bit ambitious for me, but anyway, I took her up on the offer and met this Russian woman who happened to be staying with them, and thought nothing more of it. But then towards the end of that year, I got an invite to a party, a bonfire party, at some other place where this Russian lady had been staying, which wasn't my friend's house where I'd had the dinner. It was somewhere else, a little cottage in the countryside. And long story short, the Russian lady had invited everybody she'd met while she was in England. And she went away to Russia afterwards. But at that party, I met my to-be wife. So her name was Grażyna, and we were married in 1995. And that's our little country church nearby the first house that I had, and a very young-looking me and her actually. Getting married that day. So that was in August 1994. And of course, then because Grażyna was from Poland, and we only chance met at this party because she'd been staying at the same place as the Russian lady. And so obviously once we got married, and even before then, I started regular trips to Poland. And so in 1995, a year later, I got my Polish license, Sierra Oscar 6 Delta Victor Juliet G0DVJ. Grażyna, not to be outdone, she's a polymer chemist by PhD, so she wanted to show me that she was just as good as me. So she did her radio amateur's exam as well, became G7SNO, and she also had the Polish license Sierra Oscar 6, Sierra November Oscar, SO6SNO. So we had a pair of UK licenses and a pair of Polish licenses. And she even then took her Morse test and became Mike 0 Golf India Mike, which are her initials now. She's not on the radio very often, and actually she's in Poland tonight as we do this. So here's a bit of Polish geography for those that might need it. So again, you can see that the town where she comes from, where we've got our apartment, is in Wrocław, which is number 1 here down in the southwest. Number 2 up here is where I'll talk about in a moment. This is an island, a Polish island, where I did an IOTA expedition. so right on the border with Germany there, off the northwest coast. And then, of course, Warsaw, the capital, is over here, closer to the Ukraine border, and that's where I had to actually go to get my Polish license. I couldn't do it in Wrocław. We had to go to Warsaw, to the Central Post Office and Telecommunications place in Warsaw, to get the licenses sorted out. So I had my previous Shack-in-a-Box radio, but in 1998, I bought another Yaesu, which was the FT847 when it came out. And that allowed me to discover satellites, amateur satellites. And you see RS-10 there, which was current at the time, but I worked a lot more of these low Earth orbiting satellites. So that taught me all about satellites. And also it had the 4-meter band on it in the UK. So the FT847 was the first radio I had which could do our parochial 4-meter band, which most other countries didn't have, of course, at the time. A few more have got it now. I was still doing loads of contesting with both Harwich and Ipswich clubs and some with Colchester. I was doing a lot of committee work for the clubs. So I think I at some point had every office of job on the committees for each of the clubs at some point or other. So he's cycled around them really. And sometimes some at the same time so that we could integrate the clubs a bit better. Because clubs tend to be a bit sort of cliquey in some ways. I mean, they sort of protect their own identity. And I was always very keen to get them to work together so that they had more than the sum of their parts, and so that members could take advantage of what every club did, because they also tended to do something, focus on something a bit different. At BT, I was working on all sorts of interesting stuff. So I worked with the Internet Engineering Task Force. Remember, the World Wide Web had exploded by this time. And the IETF was very active trying to work out how the internet should work after you guys had done it all in the Department of Defense initially. And I had a project there to work out what the protocol for the border gateway routers should be in the internet. So they're the big routers that take you across the planet, and how that should work with some of the new technology that was coming along. So I claim a little bit of fame of some of my code somewhere is in some of the big routers in the internet that route your packets even today, I suspect. But to find it would be quite hard now. And then I was doing quite a lot of web consultancy. What does it mean to use the web? What's it for? How can you use it? What do you do with it? And at that time, I also began my visits to MIT over in Boston, in Cambridge there. I fell in love with the place. I became BT's representative over there for a while. We had a corporate flat in Boston, and I stayed over there for some length and got very used to MIT and the Media Lab. And I spent a lot of time there learning a huge amount and about cutting edge technology, and that bode well for what came later on. In fact, I've still been I've kept that, maintained that connection. I was at MIT again last year, last November, not the November just gone, but the previous one. So yeah, already some North American connections. Now, in the 2000s, we just got married, right? I had to do a bit with the wife, right? It wasn't enough anymore just to play radio myself every evening. So we went on a few trips, and I just thought I'd throw this one in, which shows the amount of travel we did in the first half of the 2000s, of the noughties. So we went all around the planet, from Japan to Zimbabwe, South Africa, New Zealand, Hawaii, Singapore, Seychelles, Canary Islands, Peru, Canada, and I put Iceland on there. I know it's not DX from here, but I put it on there for Ari, and because it was my 30th birthday trip, so Iceland is included. But yeah, between 2000 and 2006, we had a bit of unhappy time with some miscarriages, so we never had any children. But in place of that, we excited ourselves by going and traveling around the world. I don't know quite what that noise was, but anyway, somebody will mute, I expect. Yeah, so we did a lot of travel, and I didn't do a lot of radio on those trips, but I have since. So by the early 2000s, I was sort of developing my career a bit, I suppose. And those of you who know MacLogger DX as a logging program for the Mac will know that Don V3VRW produces that and supports it extremely well. I was with it. I knew Don at that time. I made contact with him, and we were in early talks to maybe about adding a contest extension to that logging program. We didn't. We eventually decided not to do it for all sorts of reasons, but it was really good collaborating with Don, and we did a lot of interesting work behind the scenes. And I've been a MacLogger DX user ever since, and still am today for general logging. So radio-wise, I bought an FT100 to go with my FT847, so another Yaesu radio. The reason was because I wanted a smaller radio to take to Poland. I've been going to Poland a lot. I wanted to do some radio there, and the FT100 was another. Had all the bands the same as the 847, no satellite, didn't need that, and was much more portable, but 100 watts. So it was a handy radio to take compared to nowadays when I was supposed to be a mobile rig, of course, but I had a power supply over there all the time, so it was easy enough. And the reason I bought that was because it used the same accessories as the 847. So the 847 had an external ATU called an FC20, and it also used one of these motorized screwdriver antennas, the ATAS 100, which I actually bought when we went to Japan on that trip to Japan. I got a lot cheaper in Japan than I would have done in the UK. I could use those accessories with both the 847 and the FT100, and that's what sort of sold me on continuing with Yaesu radios at the time. So I was doing quite a lot of contesting around, and I thought it'd be nice to do some contesting in Poland. So you see me there with the laptop explaining to the lads at the local Polish club what I was into, and so they invited me to go to the Baltic with them for IOTA contest. And in 2003, we went with the call sign, the snappy call sign 3 Zulu 0 India /1. Not the best call sign for a contest. Bit of a tongue twister on single sideband, but it's a multi-mode contest, so I did a lot of CW. It's not that great on the key either, 3 Zulu 0 India /1. But nevertheless, EU 129 Uznam Island was the island we went to, and I had a fabulous time. They set up all the equipment, the tent there. It was by a marina, and when I said, I can't hear any generator, where are you getting the power from? And they pointed to where the boats moor up in the marina, and they just plugged into where a boat would normally plug in. And I could see at night when we were transmitting CW, the lights on the boats who were moored in the marina were sort of flashing in time with the CW. And in fact, there was one German guy who came over and said, "I see your antennas. Are you responsible for this? This?" So I let the Polish guys deal with that, and they did. But a fantastic way. Another contest. They took me halfway up a mountain near the Czech border to do a VHF field day contest, and again that was amazing because they had a 10-foot mast that they put the antenna on top of. Because we were on top of a mountain, we didn't need a higher mast. And I had a whale of a time working 2 meters and VHF field day from the top of a mountain. And again, I said, where do you get the power from for this? And they plugged into a generator that was used for the ski lift up the mountain, so they didn't have to lug the generator all the way up the side of this mountain. Now, no, I don't know if you can see, but this is our tower block where we've got a flat, and we've still got the same apartment today. But right in the middle, on the top there, there is a pole sticking up, and there was an antenna up there because I found in the block there was SP6 CPO Stanislav was already a ham in the block, which was really lucky. And when I used to go over there with my FT100. He would pass. He lived a bit lower down the block. We were on the 5th floor. He was on the 2nd floor. So I used to lower a cord down out the window, and he would tie his coax to it, and I would pull it up outside and plug it into my radio. So I didn't even need to take an antenna. I could just use the one that was on the top. He had a beam up on the top of that at one point, an HF beam on the top of the tower block. And then he had a vertical after that. So I think that picture was taken later when the vertical was up there. Unfortunately, he's no longer there, and so there's no antennas on the top of the block anymore. But now, of course, I remote, and I'll come to that later. So I don't need antennas there. So I guess work-wise, oh well, also contesting-wise, at work, I was doing some contesting. So this was the Earth station. You can see the satellite dishes at the bottom there, because the site I worked at BT was also a ground station site for Pacific broadcast, and they managed the communications for this specific broadcast, live broadcast to the satellite dishes, and the radio club, the Martlesham Radio Society. You can see we've got our tower in the middle. It looks like they're in the middle of the dishes. Actually, they're a little way away. We wouldn't put the, the tower right in the middle of their professional dishes for broadcast, but we've started putting towers up there in that field, and there was a little shed there that we could use, and so we started doing some serious contesting with some big antennas there at Golf 4 Mike Radios there at G4 Martlesham Radio Society. Now, on the work side or the computing side, at home, I'd still kept my Mac thing, so I never used a PC at home. After the BBC microcomputer that I showed you in the early 80s and late 80s, I went straight to that Mac at college, and then I continued later on. So I had MacBooks and iMacs, the first swivel iMac. In fact, I've still got that upstairs as an antique now. And then I had the really big power Macs, like the one you see up the top here, at work. And I was senior enough by now that I could buy whatever computer I wanted at work. And so I had the most powerful Mac I could get. And I saw that video was going to be important on the internet. And so I trained myself in Final Cut Pro video editing so that I could produce videos. And I used this hardware to do all the number crunching on the video production. So I figured that would be a good thing to do. I also wanted to hone my performance skills because I'd done a few presentations, but I felt there was more to it. And there was a course you could go on with BT, which was a residential course for 3 days out at a country house out in the countryside somewhere. I can't even remember where it was. And they had a political speech writer. Probably none of you remember, but at the time we had our Liberal Party leader was called Paddy Ashdown. He was an ex-military commando, and he took over the leadership of the Liberal Party here at that time. And his political speechwriter was running these courses for presentations and performances. And I learned so much from that guy. And I use it every day when I do a presentation now, how to write speeches, how to get impact from what you say, and just really interesting techniques that politicians use to have impact when they speak. In fact, I was using those techniques today because I was in London earlier today doing another one of my performances, which I'll come to later. Yeah, I learned a huge amount from that. So as well as the technical stuff, I was really lucky because at BT, I had access to the biggest computers I wanted. I got to know how to do video editing and all the tricks associated with multi-cameras and mixing video together, as well as all the interesting stuff on communications technologies and the web. So I was just in the right place at the right time. And one of the things that I also did there at this time was software-defined radio. Now, we were doing lots of stuff on emerging technology, including robotics and smart home technology and the stuff I brought back from MIT. But we were also got the chance to play with some software-defined radios, and these were quite early on stuff here. And so this was really my closest amateur radio now, because we all use SDR radios now, right? But we weren't in those days. We were using traditional super heterodyne direct conversion receivers and things. So this was quite new, and I decided that after I became their futurist in 2005, most of the people at BT's labs used to become world expert in something very, very narrow. And I took the opposite approach and kept changing departments and learning lots of different things. And so I didn't become world expert in anything, but I became quite good at a lot of things. And so when they needed a new futurologist and futurist at BT to talk to their customers about the future technologies, I got the job. And I decided I could use this SDR stuff to do some really cool demos of how you put a computer program on a screen, and 1 minute it's a TV receiver, and the next minute it's doing broadcast radio, and the next minute it's doing GPS, and the next minute it's doing something else. And that actually one box could be all these different devices. And I became eventually head of devices research. And I spent my days talking to people and customers about the new sorts of devices that we would be using with these networks, that the broadband networks that these companies were putting together, and what we would use on the internet. And I got to perform some of these technology presentations in some pretty interesting places. So one of them was the Royal Festival Hall in London on the banks of the Thames. It's the bottom picture there of the three, but also in one of the pods of the London Eye. Now, the London Eye is a big Ferris wheel with these pods on that goes around. You get about 15 people in a pod. And one day they asked me, can you do a talk about technology for our guests in one of the pods? And you've got the time it takes to go round to do your talk. So they told me how long it was, and I went in there, and we got all these VIPs in there, and I did this talk, and it was fantastic because normally in those pods there's a big sign up saying no alcohol to be consumed whilst you're travelling on the London Eye. And this thing takes quite a long while to go round. I think it's about 40 minutes to go round. So I had time. And what I didn't realise is that because this was a corporate event, that rule didn't apply. So as soon as the thing started moving, they opened this box full of bottles of champagne, and they were all drinking champagne and stuff as I was doing this talk going round. So by the time we came off, it was a good job I was taking the train home instead of the car. But anyway, that was a really interesting place, and I got a few more interesting places that I did these presentations, and it was sort of something that I was honing because I'd learned how to talk to people and how to do these things in a mildly interesting way, and how to talk at a level that could take actually quite complicated technology for people whose first subject wasn't that technology, and I think that was an important thing, a step. So. Let's have a quick look at this box. So this SDR box that I talked about. So it was the ETIS USR Universal Software Radio Platform, and it was like a vanilla SDR. It was a really powerful one of the time. You could configure it to do anything. I mean, it had two really fast channels in it for receivers and transmitter chains. So you could build basically out of this box, you could configure it to be any transmitter or any receiver, and two at a time simultaneously. And it did everything from DC to 6 gigahertz. It was really performing. It was very expensive, but because I was at BT, I could buy one of these things on the company, and providing I could show that I was doing something useful with it. It was research, so that was fine. So I really enjoyed myself with this. And then you had these daughter boards. You can probably see on the right hand side, there's 4 daughter boards showing clamped onto the top of this big board. And you could put those on to be receivers or transmitters for particular front ends. So, I bought a few of these daughter boards, and I was able to do really quite interesting demonstrations about how you could morph from one device into another without changing any hardware. And people at that time thought this was quite amazing. In fact, I was quite pleased with it as well. And of course, it had, being a universal professional box, the drivers for it supported Linux, Mac, and Windows. And so, of course, I chose Mac OS X, and I bought a really powerful laptop that I used to demonstrate and reprogram and repurpose the hardware. So I could show that you could repurpose this box to be any device instantly. Just by changing the software that you loaded on it, and again, in those days, it was quite unusual. So it was quite a neat box of tricks, and it was my first. I didn't realise at the time that amateur radio was going to go down this path, but this was a time when I got to play with the technology well before it came into the hobby. So that was ETIS SDR. So now we're getting to the late 2000s, and me and my wife had done all the globe trotting, so we decided to buy a new house. So we bought the place that we're at now, which is the place I've often talked about in terms of antennas and things. The top picture is how it looked on the form when we saw it advertised, and thought, oh, we could probably live there. Quite elaborate compared to our previous abode. And the picture underneath is so that's the front of it at the top. The picture underneath is the back of it more recently, because there used to be when we moved in, the pool was there, but it was a big industrial-like enclosure over the top, and the conservatory wasn't here, and the solar panels weren't there, and none of the planting was there. It was just concrete and and a few fruit trees, and that was it. But my wife, being quite green fingered, has planted stuff all over the place, so it's much nicer now. But the first, I think, apart from the kitchen, which we had to renovate first of all, the first room that we did was the shack. And you can see I've got a rather nice bench there, which is the one I'm using today that I'm sitting at now. This corner bench that a Polish friend of mine actually built. He was a carpenter, and he built me this bench in this shack, and I've been using it ever since. And very good it is. Now, at the time, I added some new radios to my shack. So as well as the 847, I added the FT2000, another Yaesu radio, because I wanted better HF. All right, the 847 was very good. The 100 was great for taking to Poland. The 847 was great for satellite. It was great, very, very good receiver for the HF and UHF. But on HF, the performance was a little bit down. So I wanted a dedicated HF receiver. So rather than going for another shack in a box, I bought a specialized HF transceiver, and that was the FT2000 at the time, which was new at that time. I also began investing in amplifiers because now I had this place in the countryside. It was more sociable to sort of run more power, although we only had 400 watts at the time on the license. But so I bought kilowatt linears for 2 meters from Bico, and also the Quadra amplifier to match the Yaesu. So I had the Yaesu Quadra for HF. And a friend of mine rang me one day and said, "There's this radio site nearby which has got a mast going, and you're the only person we know who's got a place big enough to erect it. Would you be interested?" So I said yes, and so he said, "Well, if you can find a way of shipping it from this site, which is about 20 miles away, north of my place, if you can find a way to transport it from that site to your place, you're welcome to it for nothing." So my brother-in-law happened to run a haulage company at the time. So I said to him, "Have you got a nice big lorry that can take a 100-foot lattice mast in 5 sections all at one time? Pretty. It's a steel mast. It's pretty heavy." And he said, "Yeah, I can organise that." So the little picture down here is this lorry with a crane on it attached to it, with my 100-footer mast on the back of it. And this is us unloading it in the front of my place. And we unloaded it, and it laid there, and it's still laying on the land that I bought now next door. I've never got it up in the air. I've got other masts, but I never got this one up in the air, mainly because of planning restrictions, and even out in our place, but also because there are some overhead lines nearby, and I have to be quite careful about that. So still not erected, but I still have it here, and I have other masts. Now, we're around May sort of 2007 by this time, and I just wanted to highlight a special event station that I did then, which was Golf Bravo 400 Alpha Alpha, GB400AA. And that was the 400-year commemoration of the first permanent settlement in North America, and I thought it was relevant to this group, from Christopher Newport's Mayflower ship that sailed from here in 1607. So, and this was in the seaport of Harwich, so what I said about earlier on. So down the bottom here, you can see me operating with the late Peter Best, G8 BLS. And we set up in this place nearby on the jetty there. You can see the mini beam antenna that we put up, and there's some other wire antennas and things. And we worked, I think it was K4J, that was the special event station commemorating it on your side. And that was a really nice multi-day special event station. I think it was on for about a week in May. And because of my connection with all the different clubs, I was able to get volunteers from all of those different clubs to come and take a turn, even though it was in Harwich, to come and take a turn and get interested in running this special event station. And it was very unusual at the time for the authorities here to allocate you a special call with 400 in it. So it had to be for something significant, and 400 years of the first settlement from sailing from the ship from Harwich to America was worth it. So we got the 400 call sign, and Christopher Newport and the Mayflower has a lot of plaques around the town of Harwich. In fact, my primary school was called Mayflower Primary School after the ship's name. Now, at the end of 2007, I left BT's research laboratories. I'd done a pretty good apprenticeship, I thought, there for 21 years, trying all sorts of different stuff without having to change jobs. And I had a pretty good time. And I thought, well, actually, I've paid off my mortgage on this nice big house now. I've got all the radios I can play with at the moment. Perhaps I'll play a bit of golf and semi-retire, which was ridiculous for somebody who's sort of basically just getting to his 50s. So I ran my own futures consultancy business for about 3 years. And because we had this nice big place with a nice big garden, we thought it'd be nice to throw an inter-club summer garden party. So we, again, because I knew all of the clubs in the local area, so I invited people from each of the local clubs. We had about 60 people here, I think, one summer's day, and we provided the food and drink. And it was really cool because it was the first time that a lot of those people who they knew each other from talking on the radio, they hadn't met each other very often because they were from different clubs. And so I brought them all together, and we had a whale of a time. And so we decided to carry on doing it each year. So we've done 17 of these summer garden parties now for the clubs in the area, one each June. The only year we missed was because of COVID. So we've been doing it for 18 years. Say that was 2007, the first one. We've done it for 18 years. We had one in June 2025, and we only missed 1 year during COVID. So that's 17 garden parties now. And I think the most people we've had here is about 70, 80 people now on that one day. We've been very lucky with the weather, and people love it. They look forward to it each year. Unfortunately, I know so many people now through the hobby that I can't invite everybody every year. So it tends to be a bit of a rotation. Also in 2008, I started operating at Mike 6 Tango. That's the superstation up at Saxmundham. You see a picture of it here with all the various antennas. I really honed my contesting skills at Mike 6 Tango. Fantastic station. And I'd regularly been part of the Walton team as well. I showed you on that map, the one at the coast where we did the VHF stuff. And again, you can see the sea from the tent, right? It's literally on the cliff top. And we put these masts up. We don't really need them that high, but we put them up for everything between 6 meters and 10 gigahertz. And we do microwave and VHF contesting from there. And it's fantastic. And both of those sites, both the HF one at M6T and the VHF and microwave one at the coast there, are top-notch teams. And I'm really, really proud to be a part of each of those teams. And they're very good to invite me along. Also in 2008-9, I discovered Bill Myers' K1GQ. And I began collaborating on Skookum Logger. There's a little Skookum Logger icon, which was the contest software for Mac OS. Now, I'd been waiting for a Mac OS contesting logger for a long time. So I started collaborating with Bill, who's a tremendous nice guy from New Hampshire there. And I wrote the code modules for all the AC radios for Skookum Logger because I was still dabbling a bit with software. I don't write much these days, but I could do that because I had a number of VAC radios and I understood them. And at that time, I'd been using still Apple computers, but I'd been using them with Apple's Boot Camp system to run Windows on an Apple. And I was using things like Super Duper contesting logger from EI5DI, which was released around 2009 as well. But I was really looking for a Mac native contest logger, and so Skookum Logger from Bill was the thing, and I jumped fully on board with that and tried to help him as much as I could with the development of that, and I still do today. I do a lot of testing of the betas that he releases for that, and he's now quite getting on with age, but he's fantastic what he does. This is all for not for a living like Don does MacLogger DX. This is a hobby for him that he does and just freely shares with people. And I've got a lot of time for Bill. I've been over there and stayed with him a lot, and he's been over here and visited with us. And we took him around all sorts of places here, and his wife. So a lovely couple, and he's introduced me to a lot more new friends over that side of the pond as well. 2009 was also when I helped form another club. So I helped form Essex CW Amateur Radio Club. And it was initially because I was passionate about CW still, and so were a few other people, mainly ex-naval people, around the county of Essex. What we didn't realise was that when we put it on the internet, people from all over the world would want to join. So it's a sort of informal version of Fists and club. If you're into CW, it's free to join. I would just support it and join. EssexCW.uk is the no .co or anything in there or .org, just EssexCW.uk. And go off there and join if you've got any support for CW whatsoever, because the more numbers there are, the better. And it costs nothing, and you get a newsletter, and they do different events and online and on-air activities and stuff, nets and competitions and stuff. So I'm not involved with the committee now, but I did about 10 years on that committee, and I was one of the founding members of that in 2009. So work-wise, what was I doing work-wise in 2008? I'd left BT. I'd finished doing some of my groovy presentations, and I carried on doing media stuff. I'd been media trained at BT. I knew how to speak to people and entertain them about technology. So I found myself in radio and TV studios, as you can see on those pictures, talking about all sorts of stuff. The one with the green screen was particularly interesting because it was almost an automated studio, and I had all sorts of technology popping up behind me that I would then talk about on TV, and that was great fun. But I also continued to present these things in interesting places. So you'll notice above the Mac computers there's a picture of Windsor Castle. And actually the Her Majesty, the Queen Elizabeth II was in residence at the time. She didn't come to my presentation, obviously, but she was in residence at Windsor at the time, the day that I did my presentation there. And it was a lovely environment to be in. I mean, talk about wood panelled rooms and chandeliers and whatnot. It was absolutely gorgeous. It's the nicest place, one of the nicest places I've ever done a presentation at. So I remember Windsor Castle very fondly. So we're getting towards the end now. Later career, 2010s, we're not far away. I started doing more radio further afield because I started getting invited to things further afield. So the shack was coming together now, as you see the background, but it wasn't quite as it is now, but you can see it coming together. Down the bottom left there, you can see that Essex CW Club had won an award for being the best club in the UK by then. I'm not sure that was because I was on the committee, but certainly the growth in interest in it was phenomenal. And a friend of mine said, I'm going to Lundy Island, which is IO71PE. It's in the middle of the Bristol Channel. It's a very small island. There's really only a lighthouse and a few cottages on it. And he said, I'm going to activate Lundy Island, IOTA Echo Uniform 120 as part of that group. Would you like to come along? So I did. And we set up a little, I think that's his FT 857 or something there, with a battery. And I promptly ran his battery down on the first charge by doing CW, because he wasn't a CW man. He just used to do QRP SSB, which was a lot less duty cycle. So he learned a bit about CW transmission at that point. Yeah, I did. That was my first outing, if you like. Expedition was to Lundy Island. And then in August 2011, I started to work for the government's innovation agency. And that's really where I started to do a lot of this stuff on emerging technology again. I was initially running multi-million-pound programs for research into computer technology. So early human-computer interaction, high-performance computing. I had access to some of the biggest supercomputers in the UK, and emerging technology like energy-efficient computing, how to write programs that ran with less energy on computing devices, something that most people weren't thinking about back then. And as part of those things, there's a cryogenic computer there on the cryogenic research going on in one of those pictures. But the top right one there is me in Bucharest. I had a visit to Bucharest, and that's Ceausescu's old palace. Again, a bit like Windsor Castle, it was one of the most ornate settings for any of my talks. And I presented in the middle of this room. It's a round circular room with a huge chandelier, but you can just see it a huge chandelier in the middle there. And the bloke said to me, "You hope that doesn't come down while you're standing in the middle doing your presentation, because it weighs 4 tons." And my word, it was an ornate place to do a presentation about technology. So continued to do interesting places, and started to hone my my presentation performances. But I wanted to do more with radio further afield. In November 2011, I got the chance to go to St. Lucia with and do CQ Worldwide CW, so the one that's just gone this last weekend, with Mike W0MU and Jim N1NK. Oh, my computing at home had shrunk, by the way, at this time, so I was down to a laptop and a Mac Mini, but still the same compute power that I had in all those earlier ones. Absolutely amazing. Yes, so this was St. Lucia. There was Mike and me looking out the French door windows, out onto the sea from the island, and doing a 2-station simultaneous multi-2 attempt at CQ Worldwide CW. And I'd become a member of a regular member of the GR2HQ IARU team at that time, so representing the UK in the big stations for the one like the Olympics per year of radio. And we also started going out to the observatory. So this picture in the middle here is an observatory. Now, a guy who used to fly swordfish in the aircraft in the war, he actually was involved in bombing the Bismarck, the German warship, sinking the Bismarck, which was quite a turning point in the war, from his swordfish plane. And he was the gunner telegrapher of that at that time, a guy called Les Sayer. And I was to meet him at the radio club. He did a great talk about his time on very modest man, but we persuaded him to do a talk about what he did that day. He was recognised and decorated by the king for his bravery and stuff in those days. But he'd set up in the countryside, and some people wanted to build an observatory, and so he let them build this observatory in his garden. And this is the observatory. And because it's very quiet and a suitable place to look at the stars, it's also very quiet from a radio point of view. And so we got talking to the observatory people and started putting some antennas up. And Les since passed away, but his wife is now licensed, and she's got a station there, and the clubs go out and use the observatory for field days and things, and it's very nice to do so. So about 2013, we started doing that. In 2016, I got my first tower up here, permanent tower, and the Stepper DB11 up. And at that time, I also got involved with training people. So I completely rewrote the syllabus for training in the local clubs, and that's when I started getting people into the hobby and doing most of the teaching for those training courses at all levels. At the time, Ipswich Radio Club was left from a benefactor who passed away, a previous member, was left quite a lot of money. So they were able to buy the Ellicraft K-line, which was currently the K3S, and all the stuff that went with it, including the KPA 500. So they bought a whole suite of that, and that was my first introduction to Ellicraft through that club kit. And I used to borrow it quite a bit to do my first attempts at SO2R and 2 radio stuff. In February 2017, I reunited with Mike W0MU, and we went to Belize, and we did the ARRL CW contest from Belize for 2 of us, and a great fun that was as well. So there were a few of the expeditions that I went on, and again, learned everything. Every time I learned a huge amount about the hobby by doing these things. In 2018, we bought an adjacent piece of land. You can see what I've showed before in my talks. This funny shaped parcel of land, as they called it, next to our plot here. And I've been building antennas on there ever since, mainly receive antennas, but also a new beam. And that mast that I haven't put up yet is still laying down over there. But I had to buy that piece of land at auction because there were some travellers, as we politely call them these days, who were previously known as gypsies, who also wanted to buy the land and do not so pleasant things with it. So my neighbours were very pleased when I won it at the auction, and I was very pleased that I had somewhere to put antennas on. And finally, in 2019, my shack went software-defined radio. So I sold the FT2000, I sold the 847, and I replaced them with the FTDX101MP and the ICOM 9700, which gave me satellite capability still, gave me 4 meters still, gave me a much better receiver or 2 receivers on HF, gave me 2 receivers on VHF as well, and the whole lot was SDR now. So I'd moved with the times and changed everything. Work-wise, in 2017, I was still working for the government agency. I invented a new innovation program with the national laboratories. And I just wanted to mention this a little bit because it's some of the more exciting stuff that I've come across. So it was called Analysis for Innovators. And what it did is it took companies who had a problem, a technical problem with their products or services, and they could get a grant from us to fix the problem and therefore become more productive. And the way they would fix the problem or even find out what the problem was, so it might be a company that made widgets on a production line and 5% of them always cracked and they didn't understand why. I would get them to work with partners from these national laboratories using the latest cutting edge equipment and facilities and expert scientists to work out what their problem was and fix it. And it was a very popular program, and it got me to working around all the different national labs. So these are a bit like your Lawrence Livermore labs in the USA and other labs you have there, but national facilities spread all over the country. The Harwell campus I was at just the other day again, they have a diamond light source, which is a synchrotron accelerator, this big circular thing in the middle here. They have a central laser facility, which has a petawatt laser, all right, not gigawatt, but a petawatt laser facility. You can fire laser beams at these different objects and look at the particles that come off and learn about what's happening inside the target by bombarding them with high energy laser. They have a neutron source and a muon source. So they have a block of lead, which is, I don't know, something like 30 feet cube of lead. And they can put an object, a physical object on one side of this block of lead, and this sensor with neutrons on the other side, and draw an image of what's the other side of the block of lead. You know, it's absolutely phenomenal what you can do with neutrons instead of X-rays. So it's the latest thing in terms of imaging. And they also have a space lab as well. So it's this clean room thing here. This one at the bottom is the neutron facility. The one at the top there, the blue and white one, is Vulcan, the petawatt laser, and this is the National Physical Lab up the top here on the right. They run the national time standard, so if you want to know what an accurate second is, they can tell you. It's a bit like the standard kilogram that's in Paris in the laboratory. Here they can tell you what the second is, and Ari would like that because it's always right. They have an experimental lake, so they can do underwater experiments. They have every imaging and spectroscopy image technology known to man. They have a quantum laboratory for doing all the quantum type sensing and timing stuff. And they have a position and navigation lab that does next generation GNSS and GPS type technologies. Then there's the Daresbury lab, which is up near Manchester, up here, which I used to go there for the Hartree supercomputing. So they have some of the fastest computers in the land up there for processing things, and now AI compute as well. And also the Cockcroft Accelerator Centre. So these are particle accelerators, and they're working on shrinking the size of particle accelerators that are usually, you know, huge installations down to much smaller accelerators. There's the Balby Mine Lab, which is almost a mile deep under the ground. They do particle physics and all the experiments there, which is a unique place. All the experiments where you want to get rid of all the interference that you would get on the surface, right? So it's absolutely quiet down there from a radio point of view, from a radiation point of view. you can do some really amazing experiments down in the Balby mine. The Jodrell Bank telescope for space and pilot, also linked to the square kilometre array. So I did some work with them on astronomy, and also the Medicines and Health Regulatory Agency. So they're the people that regulate any new medicines and things that we have here, and so they do a lot of research on biological techniques, and so I learnt a lot from them as well. So going back to that, the shack. So from 2009, I went from this to this 10 years later. So I'd swapped the 2000 for the 101. I'd swapped the 847 for the 9700. I'd kept the Beco and Quadra ramps, and I'd swapped the FT100 for a KX3 by this time. So what had I actually done apart from modernizing and adding capability and performance? Well, all the traditional top-down conversion tech had gone. There were no pan adapters in 2009, no real dual receive, no USB, Ethernet or video out to be seen on any of these radios. Fairly good performance numbers, but nothing exceptional. And it was all Yaesu and no digital modes. Contrast that with 2019 upgrade. Now everything was hybrid SDR technology with pan adapters. There were true dual receivers. USB, Ethernet, and video out was arriving on most of the rigs. Excellent top performance numbers on the receiver side. And now I've moved to a mix of Yaesu, ICOM, and Elecraft. And the ICOM includes the digital D-Star stuff.
I will get here earlier, but the traffic was slow.
I think we've got somebody from Eric. We've got a bit of noise there. So now that was the last upgrade I did. Of course, since then I've added the KPA 1500. I've added the K4, and I've changed a few other things. So wrapping it up, it's about towards retirement now in the 2020s. At work, I took on a much more strategic role in terms of future technologies and what we should invest in the UK. And pretty much like I was the futurist for BT all those years ago, I became the innovation agency's futurist. So I'm still presenting in nice locations and still visiting MIT. I get to go to dinners and get dressed up occasionally, as you can see in the top middle there. Also now, you can see some of the venues. So I went to the Millennium Stadium in Cardiff, which is up here in the top left. The Beehive thing at the Sage in the northeast. So a marvelous acoustic venue. They do music contests, concerts in there. It's an international music venue. And I do these glimpse of the future talks with an avatar on the screen and me wearing the goggles and the Apple Vision Pro these days. And that's me at the bottom at my last visit to MIT. In fact, I was doing one of these glimpse of the future things this afternoon in London. I recently did a keynote at the Tech UK conference, Thinking Like a Futurist, and you can see some other things there that where I've been on stage doing my act. I've also been working with the security services and the UK Defence Academy and NATO. There was some stuff about how to engineer biology for defence purposes, and also looking at other drivers of change, not just technology, but how cooperation and confrontation is developing, and how innovation can either happen or stagnate, and also looking for global trends of what's becoming important to people, like the rare earth minerals and the shortages of these things. So that's taken me into lots of cutting edge tech, from nature inspired smart materials through to new biological technologies, new compute paradigms. So a compute that doesn't work on digital electronics anymore, but works on biological cells or quantum or photonic computing. Neuromorphic computing, where we build systems in the architecture of the brain instead of how we've always built them in von Neumann compute paradigms. And Science 5.0, the fifth coming of science and discovery, where AI and robotics can do some of the scientific discovery alongside humans, but also the immersive tech. So that's why I use the smart glasses to do that, and a lot around quantum sensing as well. So that keeps me busy during the day, and at home I added the K4, as I said, the K4D. Last year, I had the pleasure while I was over at MIT to nip up to KC1XX and use the 10-meter station there, another super shack. In fact, I worked KC1XX on all 6 bands during the contest this last weekend, and because of that visit, I knew most of a lot of the operators that were there as well personally. In 2022, which you've heard about in some of the sessions we've had, we started building the new shack, the second shack project above the garage, and by mid 2023 it was operational. So that's the new shack, and I guess in May 2023 I did my first actual proper, I would say proper remote control from Poland. So this is the K30. I had the K3S here in the shack here, and the K30 I took to Poland with me with a remote rig box, and I was doing proper remote from there. Of course, now we've got a lot more with remote going on, and I could talk about that as a separate thing if anybody's interested. But another time. Last year I added the KPA 1500 amplifier, and so now I pretty much have the shack how I want it. It's a very nice shack to be in. I count myself very fortunate, and I've learnt a lot by getting there. And I guess the last bit is to say, well, my computing now is changed. I now wear my computing on my head. My main computer here is not the Mac Mini; it's the Apple Vision Pro. I wear that in the evening to do my messaging and my emails and my web browsing and my YouTube and everything else, rather than sitting in front of a computer. It sits in front of me instead. And so I have real first-hand experience of how to use spatial computing. And I've got a little video that I think is going to play there just to give you a slight view of how this works. So you're sitting in your lounge with your feet up, you're watching the TV, you've got the TV on in the corner there. And you can have a window wherever you like. I've just opened one window here, which is showing a map of Plane Finder, so I can see which planes are coming in. This was my wife flying from Warsaw to Stansted, and I could see the progress of a plane on the map in real time. And I could put that window at any size I want, anywhere in the room, on the ceiling, on the walls behind me. And I can get details of the plane, and then I can see the plane in flight. And I can be behind the plane or in the plane as it's flying in 3D while I'm sitting on the sofa. And I think that just shows how far things have come. You have to be careful because you move your head around and it throws the video off, but you get the idea, hopefully, a little bit from that about how it is. So that's my home computing now. I think I better stop there. I hope there's been something in there for everybody. Some of it won't have been to your liking, but as I say, there's lots of different stuff in there, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thanks for listening. Are you all asleep?
Yeah, we're all asleep. Where were you in St. Lucia? On the north end of the island?
Yeah, right up the north end.
I think
Gosh,
I was in the same place.
I can't remember the name of the place. Lovely guy who's got the chalet there.
Yeah,
Who rents it out. Yeah,
yeah,
I forget his name.
I did the expedition there myself with a couple other guys.
Cool. Yeah, if you said the name of the place, I would know it immediately. But yeah, it was a fantastic location to play radio.
Thanks for taking the time, Jonathan. Good stuff, good fun.
That's quite
Yeah,
a
very
career
good.
you've had.
Quite a career.
Yeah, I've done a lot of different stuff. I mean, a lot of people, most people, I think, start with something and get narrower and more detailed. And I've always tried to do lots of different things, and that's been very good for me, good for the career, and take me to some interesting places. I'm sure you get to interesting places if you're world expert in something very small, but I think you get more opportunities if you know a little bit about a lot of things.
I didn't realize we had such a superstar with us. Eric, you're going to have to treat him with more respect.
Yeah, it's fun. A lot of the stuff I've done is a lot of fun, right? I mean, you could sit in a laboratory all day and do R&D. It's much nicer to get out there in a big audience of 300 people. I had about 120 people today to talk to about stuff I love. I love this technology stuff, and I had an hour to talk to them and then an hour to listen to what they thought about it. And we'll get a lot of information from that, from the businesses that were present, about the innovation they consider doing, and what they could do with the new technology that's coming along. And I consider it a privilege to be able to basically spend my life earning money by doing something I really enjoy. And whether it's in a TV studio talking to a camera, or whether it's 300 people in a room or 500 people on a webinar, I don't mind. But it's great to talk to people and to listen to them as well about what they think. And by meeting more people, you always learn something new, and that's the approach I've always taken.
Fascinating. Go ahead,
I've
John.
got a question.
There's a little limit to some of the stuff that I can talk about about the work I do, but yeah, you can imagine. Sorry, John, go ahead.
Yes, that was a very impressive career you had, and your presentation was very comprehensive. So I really don't have a question directed to you, but I do have a question about your father. He was born, if my arithmetic is correct, he was born in 1935. And that makes him around 7 or 8 years old during World War II. So my question is, does he remember the Blitz? Does he talk about that? And did he get shipped off to the countryside?
Yes, and yes. Yeah, absolutely, John. He remembers it very well. He talks about the bombs falling in London. He was actually from London originally, so before he got posted out to Harwich and the stuff he did when he met my mother, she was from Harwich originally, but he was from North London, and it was heavily targeted in that wartime period. And he was moved out to Oxfordshire in the countryside eventually. His elder brother was I won't say fatally, but very seriously injured by shrapnel injuries from that, and he died relatively young age as a result. He remembers it very well, and he was about that age, as you say. He's 91 now. He's just been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, so he's struggling a little bit these days. But and we had a few dramas to deal with this morning before I went off to London to do this presentation, and then come back in the evening to do this one. So it's been quite a busy day, all told. But he's doing actually quite well for 91. On his 91st birthday, we took him out. We said, "What do you want to do?" And he said, "Well, I'd like to play 9 holes of golf," because he's always been a good sportsman. So we took him to a golf course, and he played 9 holes of golf, and he was knocking the spots off the rest of us. I mean, we absolutely great to see him do that. We had various guys from the family who swing a club to go around with him, and he needed a buggy to get around the course. But when he got off the buggy and swung a club, you knew somebody who knew what they were doing and hit it. And he's always played a lot of sport for fun. He's never been a professional sportsman. He had a trial for Tottenham Hotspur, I think, their White Hart Lane ground, when he was a youngster, and he didn't follow it up because I think he went into the Air Force. But he could have probably been a professional sportsman at some point. He's won a lot of stuff with particularly racket sports and tennis and other things. But he always said he found golf to be more of a challenge because it's a stationary ball, whereas with the other racket sports he played, it was a moving ball, and he found it easier to put pace on that.
Well, thank you for sharing that.
No problem. He marvels now at what I do. He follows me on the Find My Friends app and stuff about where I'm traveling around to see these different things, both whether I'm doing equipment visits, facility visits, or presentations somewhere. So he will have been watching today when I was in London to see that I got there okay and how I was traveling back and stuff. And I send him the videos and the agendas of the things I'm doing. He thinks it's absolutely fascinating. I'm sure he doesn't understand a lot of it, but
But never got a license.
He never got a license. No, he was never interested in the radio thing at all. I mean, he finds it fascinating what I built here in terms of, he sees the tower and the room and the shack and thinks, Christ, what, you're taking this seriously, aren't you, son? But he's never been interested in it himself to get. So I was completely self-taught from the books.
When do you
Wasn't
retire,
until
Jonathan?
I'm thinking about April, sort of at the end of the financial year here, and I'm thinking that might be a nice time to retire. I'm going off to Australia later this month after Christmas for the best part of 2.5 weeks to see the Sydney Harbour Bridge fireworks at New Year's Eve and some of the Test match cricket that's on over there at the moment between England and Australia, where we haven't started too well. I've got some tickets for going to that, and we're going to travel around to Adelaide and Melbourne as well as Sydney. So I'm doing that, and then coming back on round about just before my birthday, which is on the 19th, and then I'll do a couple more months and see where we get to March, April. But I'm thinking about that sort of time at the moment.
And when do you open the B&B for the year?
Well, if you can get over here, you're welcome to stay anytime. I mean, there's nobody else here. We've got limited space, but yeah, we're happy to see people. I'm going to be busy in July this year because of the World Radio Team Championship. So I'm involved as a volunteer in setting up those stations. 52 stations being set up for that contest.
Wow.
in the one weekend in this area, of East Anglia, and I'm helping out at the HQ station and the ferrying people around, as well as building some of the tech and testing some of the scoreboard technology and stuff. So they've got me working on some of that. So I need to retire by then because I need about a 3-week period off in order to. I've got some friends coming over from the States and Japan who are operating in that, and I expect, as well as the residential part of the contest weekend, they'll be staying here for some of the time to go out and do some sightseeing with us.
Marvelous. Anybody else have any questions or comments?
Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you.
Good.
I guess we're back to our regular daytime programming. Hi, Russ.
Jonathan, you spoke of your father being born in 1935. Is that correct?
I think it was just 34, actually. He's 91 now. So, yeah, something like that. He's already gone through the birthday this year. So I think it was 34.
Okay, well, he was born the same year as Neil, and I was born in 35.
Right.
So we're along in the same age group.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Frankie, 1934 was a damn good year.
Yeah, I thought so.
Obviously, 34, 35, and 66 were good. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
it was a great presentation. I enjoyed it very much.
It was wonderful. It was interesting to hear about the Blitz. And of course, I can remember Pearl Harbor Day and FDR announcing that we were now involved in World War II.
Yeah.
I was 7 years old.
Well, I was 6 at the time, and I remember in quite a bit of detail when we first found that Pearl Harbor was bombed.
Mm.
I wasn't born yet.
I was waiting for somebody to say that.
Neither was I. But I think I still have my TI 81.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Sinclair used basic.
ZX81. Yeah.
Yeah, ZX81. Yeah.
Yeah, ZX81.
And it
it was quite interesting.
Used a cassette recorder to record the programs.
That's right.
With audio.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
you had audio.
It had a chip that you could load basic
That's
from
right.
a RAM, and then it had
Yep.
like 1K of memory. But you could add on memory to it. It had a
16K pack, I think, on the back that you could put
yeah,
on.
on the back
You
you
could clip on.
clip
It was a
on
bit
the-
unreliable, I think. You had to wedge it carefully because if it came disconnected
Oh,
while
yeah.
it was on, the whole thing crashed. And
yeah.
yeah, it was pretty unreliable at times, but it was done on a budget. I mean, it was a relatively small cost thing,
And then it
it
used
had a-
a standard TV for the output.
that's right. Yeah, UHF modulator in there for the TV output and a membrane keyboard, so you had to press pretty carefully on
Yeah.
the keyboard to get things to register.
I think my first computer, it was a TI 99. And
Texas Instruments. Yeah.
And then I went high cotton, John. I got a Commodore 64.
Yeah. I remember
Oh,
the Commodore
oh.
PET was out before the 64, and we had one of those at school, but the BBC were trying to get that BBC Micro into a lot of schools to help with the literacy project of what people should do with computers. It wasn't all about programming. It was just about, what's this microcomputer thing that you can have in the home now. And they did a lot of good work around that in terms of getting the population on board with what these things were.
The first computer logging software that I ever used was actually written by two friends who live here in Atlanta, Dean Fredrickson, W8ZF, and Jack Lennox, AA4LU, who worked for AT&T. And they wrote a program called DX Space. And it was on a 5 1/4 inch floppy.
Yes, I remember 5 1/4 inch floppies, but I didn't use them much, of course, because I went from there was a 5 1/4 inch floppy drive for the BBC Micro that you could use, which was quite unusual in those days. But then, of course, when I went Mac, the Macintosh had a 3-inch or 3.5 inch drive in it originally.
Do you remember the 7.5 inch floppies?
Oh yeah,
I've seen them, but I never used them.
What about
I did use
the deck single highs that you used to jam in the 1175s?
My old buddy
I do remember
Louis Schubert, K4NYK, had given me, I guess it was about 12 or 14 inches, a 10 megabyte platter that came out of one of the computers that Life of Georgia, the insurance company, had that he maintained. And I don't know what happened to that thing. It was like a huge frisbee.
I remember punch card systems for input because we had those at school, and we used to have a lesson in computer studies for my O levels that I talked about, where you would punch a set of cards for your program, you would send it off, and then the next week's lesson would be when you got the printout back of whether it had crashed or not. So you could make a small error on the first card, and then you'd get nothing back the following week because the whole thing had crashed. So it was a bit to say it was sort of offline processing was a bit of an understatement, but you learned about punch cards, and you learned to be accurate, and you learned to put them in the right order and number them and discipline like that. So it was all part of the learning process.
Yeah, I went to Rutgers. I went to Rutgers Newark, the engineering school, and we had they used to do the punch cards. This is in 1969 and 1973. And they would do the punch cards, and we learned Fortran at the time.
Right.
And at the end, the guy that ran the computer system at our school in Newark would have to send the cards. They'd do whatever they did. They'd send it down to New Brunswick, the main school. They would do the computing overnight, send it back. And the guy used to bitch at us all the time that remember the space card you had to do? You might not remember, Jonathan, put a space card at the end.
Right.
And it would print out 1 or 2 spaces, and they would break the jobs up that way. Well, this guy was such a jerk that there was 6 of us in the fraternity that took this course. And the last computer run we had to make was really for no credit, but it was 2 days before we graduated. And each of us made the space card 1,000 sheets. When this guy printed out the job, he must have had a heart attack.
Yeah, at least you got yours back the next day, sort of thing. We were having these things sent off, as I say, down to the nearest computer that was somewhere in the county, in the rest of the county. So it was a week before we got the stuff back again. But you'd sort of forgotten what you'd done the previous week by then. Yeah, the languages were interesting. You say about Fortran. I mean, when I went to college, it was a fairly new syllabus in those days, computer science, as a BSc bachelor degree, and they did teach us things like Fortran and COBOL and stuff like that. But they were quite forward looking. They also taught us Modular 2, which was an early thing from Pascal and stuff like that. They also taught us functional languages like Forth and Lisp and ML, and they also taught us mathematical specification techniques, which came in very useful when I went back to BT. So it was quite a forward-looking syllabus, and I still think, although my A levels were pretty poor in terms of grades, the fact that I only got into that polytechnic as opposed to a university that was still trying to find its feet with computer science in those days, and perhaps didn't have the same equipment as the industrial relationship down the road that my place did. I was pretty lucky to to not get the top grades, because I went to a place that had this diversity in the computer infrastructure that they had, which is probably part of the diversity that I've shown ever since in terms of doing lots of different stuff. Rather than
I went to
programming.
college for a very good reason. I had a choice between going to Vietnam after high school or going to Canada, and since I didn't speak Canadian, that was out of the question. I wound up doing my service after college, and that was even worse. So it's
that made me laugh, Alan, when you said about speaking Canadian. I used to be involved in Olympic archery as a judge, and I had a young fellow come over to me who was an archer from South Carolina at the national championships, and he had a question. I said, "So why are you talking to me? Talk to the judge in your sector. He's responsible." He said, "He's from Canada, and I don't speak Canadian." And I looked at him and I said, "It may give you a great shock, but Canadians actually speak English."
Neil, don't take this the wrong way, Neil. How much expertise do you need to tell somebody they've hit a bullseye?
You need talent. Yeah. Actually, there's a lot to judging, and seriously,